In 1984, the Toyota MR2 joined the iconic sports car group from Toyota of the Celica and the Supra. Later joined by the legendary AE86 Corolla, the three brothers was an attempt to expand their portfolio in the rapidly expanding American market, and the MR2 went on to a 23-year history spanning over 3 generations. While I feel it never hit the legendary status of its brothers, the MR2 is a much-loved car from the era, and honestly much missed. This is a far too brief history of the Mr. 2. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I'm John, and I love the MR2, but its history will forever be entwined not only with the other Toyota offerings, but also with the Pontiac Fiero that beat it to the market by 1 year. While the Pontiac was larger, heavier, less power, slower, it built its own cult following, although it had a tendency in early years to catch on fire. But oddly, both vehicles had similar backstories with their makes, trying to build a small, fuel-efficient city car that just happened to be a little sporty to drive. The story of the MR2, which stood for mid-engine rear-wheel drive two-seater or midship runabout two-seater, depends on who you ask, starts back in 1976 when Toyota started to design a project for a car that was fun to drive, economical, but not necessarily a sports car. I envision the first thoughts were of a nippy little city car. The project was delayed and picked back up in 1979 when they settled on a sporty car layout with a mid-engine transverse engine. By 1981, there was a prototype called the SAX, and by 83 Toyota Motor Show, there was an SV3 prototype that was so close to production form, only the front and rear spoilers ended up being redesigned primarily for better aerodynamic stability and crosswinds. As development towards production progressed, Toyota did a significant amount of testing on racetracks, using F1 driver Dan Gurney at Willow Springs to help hone the car, as well as tapping into Lotus's expertise with mid-engine designs to help them with the suspension and the handling setup. The car ended up being an odd combination of careful cost and a design balance, combining tried and true elements like the McPherson strut suspension mated with a somewhat rare four-wheel disc brake setup. Trusted engines were mounted transversely, and the rear of this new frame with 5 structural bulkheads to provide that rigidity. The car was launched in June of '84 in Japan, and it was a hit. And competitors from the Honda CRX, the Nissan Pulsar, the Fiero, the older VW Scirocco, and the old Fiat X19 all vied for attention in the marketplace. But the MR2 was a focused, sporty success. The first generation platform was designated the W10 with a 1.5 liter known as the AW10 and a 1.6 liter as the AW11, but the car was designed to handle up to a 2 liter engine. The 1.6 liter naturally aspirated inline 4 with dual overhead cams and 4 valves per cylinder was known as the 4AGE and came from the Corolla, with 112 horsepower in the US and a 5-speed manual as standard and a 4-speed automatic as options. Oh, because it was the 80s, it had pop-up headlights. With a somewhat heavy curb weight of 2,350 pounds, it could do a 0 to 60 time in the mid to high 8-second range, making it notably faster than the Fiero or Fiat's X19. Consider that the CRX weighed under 1,900 pounds at the time, a testament to the structural efforts Toyota put in. In model year 1986, but in '88 for the US, they introduced a supercharged version of the engine designated the 4AGZE with 145 horsepower and dropping that 0 to 60 time to about 6.5 seconds. It had a feature that disengaged an electromagnetic clutch on the supercharger when not needed to save gas. They hadn't forgotten their initial design criteria to be frugal. They'd also offered a T-top option because, again, it was the 80s, and they made multiple other mostly cosmetic changes. The The first generation received a substantial update unofficially known as Mark 1B, updating the base engine to 115 horsepower, strengthening it, along with many other improvements such as larger brake rotors, new front bumper, and interior changes. These are unofficial changes and there's a considerable difference, but a lot of overlap occurred, as well as the Mark 1Bs with Mark 1A bumpers, for example, but the most notable difference is the rear suspension is not interchangeable between them. Upon launch, the MR2 won Japan's Car of the Year. Both Road and Track and Car and Driver chose it as a 10 best. It was Motor Trend's Car of the Year for 1985. And interestingly, Toyota Celica's rally cars weren't competitive on some of the twisty stages, and Toyota began developing the MR2 into a rally car codenamed the 222D in 1985. It was never completed, as the Group B it would have competed in was canceled. The first generation sold nearly 97,000 units in the US and Canada. For the second generation, the MR2 went through a thorough redesign for 1989 and now was designated the W20. It was larger, it was heavier, about 350 pounds, but more spacious and comfortable with larger engines. And it was flat out sexy, sometimes being referred to as the baby Ferrari. On sale in Japan in 1989, it made its way to the US in 1990 as a 1991 model with a 2.2-liter naturally aspirated engine, the 5S FE, with 130 horsepower and a 5-speed manual or 4-speed automatic, as well as the MR2 Turbo, with a 2-liter engine producing 200 horsepower with only the 5-speed available. The Turbo could do 0 to 60 in about 6.1 seconds. Once again, it was offered as a coupe or in T-top version. It had worldwide an incredible 10-year production run, but notably in '92, Toyota responded to journalists who complained the car would spin too easily by revising the suspension geometry and helping it handle more neutrally. Of course, people complained. It was still labeled the most dangerous car you could buy. Over its lifetime, it went through 4 revisions that updated everything from power output to tweaks to the suspension and the transmission. The car was a major success worldwide, with aftermarket tuners, motorsports, body modifications such as the SW20 Spider that they only made 91 of by Toyota Technocraft, and almost anything the car could be thrown into. Famously, it was raced against other and more expensive cars like the NSX and came away a winner there too. Ultimately, sales in the US ended in 1995, with the car continuing worldwide until 1999. It sold about 33,000 in the US and Canada. The third generation was teased all the way back in 1995 with the MRJ concept at the Tokyo Motor Show. People went wild for it, already saying this was the final design and estimating production dates and pricing for it. But in 1999 in Japan and March 2000 in the US, the W30 designated MR2 was officially known as the MRS for Midship Sport in Japan, and the MR2 Spider here in the US, thanks to its only available convertible top. It took a new approach to the same formula. Once again being mid-engined, it was more focused on driving enjoyment and to intentionally break the cycle of cars getting larger and heavier with each generation. Possibly because of competition from a certain convertible roadster out there. It became a convertible only. The wheelbase grew 2 inches to 96.5, while the body became shorter, narrower, and lighter. The styling broke from the previous generation with something that can be considered controversial. It's not exactly ugly, but it is perhaps a bit homey. The only engine available was the 1ZZFE 1.8-liter inline-4, making 138 horsepower. That could still scoot from 0 to 60 in about 6.8 seconds with that 5-speed manual, and thanks primarily to the reduction in weight. Also, it had as an option the sequential manual transmission, SMT, a type of automated manual transmission where you tap the shift lever forward or backwards or press steering wheel buttons to change gears, but it does not have a fully automatic mode. This led to slower shifts, added about 2 seconds to the 0 to 60 times, but for those who cruise in the car at highway speeds, it is often preferred because it does drop the RPMs a little bit and lead to a little bit more calm environment in the car. Handling was much improved, and it is broadly considered to be the best handling MR2, if perhaps a bit underpowered, and it can be favorably compared to the Porsche Boxster. That's not a bad comparison to be making. For this reason, owners comfortable with modifying their cars have often swapped in the 2ZZ FE that makes up to about 189 horsepower. A global slowdown in the sports car market had an effect, and in July 2004, Toyota announced they were canceling the MR2 due to slow sales. The 2005 model year was the last one in the US, while continuing in Japan, Mexico, and Europe until 2007. This generation only sold about 28,000 in the US and Canada. Now, with the somewhat recent additions of the Supra and the GR86 reviving the Celica, a revival for the MR2 and the recreation of the three brothers has been rumored for years, and it's been teased. Sneak peeks such as this one so far have yielded nothing, but fans continue to hope for another affordable mid-engine world beater from Toyota. Personally, I have fond memories of the MR2. It is, I think, underappreciated relative to its brethren, but it still holds a really special place in that 80s and 90s of an affordable sports car for everybody. I really would like to see a revival of it, but I have to admit I'm part of the problem. See, while I love the idea of this car, it would have to be something I had enough money to buy as a second or a third car to enjoy in, well, relatively small amounts. A two-door, two-seater with essentially no cargo space really doesn't fit the logical decision-making of I need a car for everyday use. I still pull for the MR2. I still love to look at the MR2 and all of its variations, and I've barely touched on them here, what was available from all of the different tuners out there, the body kits and all the tuning you could do to the engine and the suspension, and the success it had in motorsports. It was an achievement that I think is just overshadowed by its brothers. And I would love to see a revival today from these companies that are busy making bread and butter SUVs for everybody, a focused, small, not overpowered, superbly handling sports car for everybody. Let me know your thoughts below, guys.